Okay, the recording seems to be working at this point in time. So welcome everybody to the Podman Community Cabal meeting. This is a meeting that we generally talk about future design decisions and topics along those lines rather than demos. The demos meetings are generally held during the community meetings, which will be coming up in June. I think it's June 2nd. We'll talk about that later on today. For today, we have 4 topics lined up. We have a talk about containersh being led by Dan and Lokesh. We have another topic about storage, allowing layers to be split across multiple files. And Anders, thanks for joining today. I know it's a holiday and all, where you're at. And I think he's joined at this point. And then we'll be talking about podman.io. We've got some very exciting new changes going on there. Maureen is going to be talking about. And then Dan's going to be talking about the App Store and the containers project. So given all that, oh, and another thing I should say, I'll put a link to the HackMD. I'll be taking notes during the meeting today in HackMD. If you have anything to add that I've messed up, or you want to add a link or anything like that, go ahead and please do it there. And I'm trying to check on in a moment here. Given all that, I'm going to start it off with Dan and Lokesh. I'm not sure who's doing the talk for this one, for the containersh.
Yeah, I guess. I'm getting feedback. Or the people getting it? All right, the echo went away. So I don't have any presentation on it right now. And Lokesh, myself, and some people from the SE Linux team have been working as a side project on an idea what we're calling Podman Shell. And what this basically is will be an enhancement to Podman to allow you to configure a shell account or a login account with a shell of Podman Shell, which would automatically inject a user into a container when he logs into the system. So think of it like a honeypot environment. What we're trying to do is to do it as part of, just a link off of Podman, so it won't be a new executable. And we're also going to be taking advantage of Quadlet to define a user container for that user. So imagine you create a Quadlet, a Podman shell.quadlet .container. You define which image you want the user to be injected into, what C groups you want them to be confined with, what volumes you want to make available to the user inside of the environment. Then when the user logs onto the system, he would automatically get, or he or she would automatically get injected into the container and be locked down with that. The container would have any rights that you wanted to expose to the user. The reason we've had a couple of government type customers that have come in and talked to us about how they would like to be able to use some container technology to actually control users that are logging into the system. So you can imagine you have a sort of a system with lots and lots of data on it. But you want to give a user a shell account so that he gets onto the system and only able to see certain directories on the system. Another idea would be you want to set up sort of more like Toolbox, where you would log onto a system and have an entire suite of tools available to you that will be different than other users logging into the system, onto the same system, but have constant data that you could use to do it. So I think it's a fairly small enhancements to Podman, and most of the functionality. We found that most of the functionality is available now in the system just by using systemd to start up a service for the user, and then just basically getting a Podman exec into the shell, into the container that you're going to create. One issue we're having right now is a timing issue, and that I think there's a bit of a race condition, because really what we want to have happen is when the user SSH is into the box, this container gets started for the session, and then I think We haven't quite figured out how to wait for the shell, for the container to get up and running before you try to exec into it. So if Podman shell execs in right away, then the container might not be up and running at the time. So it's a race condition. The beauty of using systemd to manage the actual containerized service is that systemd will keep track of all sessions. So if you logged into the system multiple times, then systemd will maintain the service running until you log out of all sessions, and then we kill off the container. So anyways, we've talked internally about this, and this is the first time we're really talking about it externally. Does anybody have any questions?
Dan, on the problem of the container starting, the racy part, could you define basically a bogus dependent container and wait on that one? So it would be essentially you'd wait on one, but you're really just using it as a indicator for the other.
Well, I think the problem is that Podman shell is gonna. I think when you log into the system, Lokesh, you've experienced this, right? Can you talk about it?
Yeah. So the one thing I've noticed was if I rerun the setup, I often end up with no such container image.
Right.
Sorry, no such container. So, and I also see a bunch of SE Linux messages about non-existent users. So,
yeah, I think what's happening is when you log into the box, as you log in, systemd realizes you're creating a new session. It starts the session, then starts the container, but simultaneously the Podman shell is running. So I think what we need to do is to have Podman shell be smart enough to retry for some period of time, basically do a fallback until the container actually exists, would be the most sane, but only do it for, 10 seconds or something. It might be something we have to configure, but
we do that basically a back off, right, as well, with other stuff where you try and 250 milliseconds and then 500 and then 1 second. Yep.
I think we do that, and then if the container doesn't start for a certain amount of time, then kill the shell and drop out. I think that, but any other comments, questions, thoughts?
What's the primary, jumping up and down user use case, if you will?
So the users that first brought this up were basically real heavy security people who wanted to a traditional use case for these type of customers is that they allow a user to get onto a system that has data that's at multi-level, so top secret data, and they want to allow the user to get onto the system and then only be able to view, say, secret data. And traditionally, they've done this with SE Linux, but the problem with SE Linux is that if the user just does standard commands like ls of an environment, he's likely to get at or ABC generation on places that he shouldn't be looking at. And so it becomes very complex because what I like to say is SE Linux is complex because we give you a view of everything in the universe, and then we basically say, why you're looking, basically SE Linux is going to say, why you're looking here, why you're looking there, why you're looking here. And with containers, we give you a view of almost nothing of the operating system, and then we just start opening up windows to the operating system through volumes. And so it becomes a lot easier for people to say, you know, okay, you can get on my system, but the only thing you can see is this directory on my system. And that's a lot more human understandable than you get on my system, you can see everything, and then I start to block you from looking at parts.
I remember we had a FTP server, and when we went to not to the same option of FTPS, but to SFTP, then we ended up running shells where you previously were just serving files.
Right.
So, so that was a use case back in the day, with a custom shell that only allowed you to visit certain directories and run certain commands. That SFTP. So that could be.
I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, I talked about doing some stuff with SE Linux around guest and ex-guest. And I used to talk about how you could, you know, imagine a kiosk machine at a library where you come in and basically will allow you to do web browsing and, you know, go and use the printers and things like that. Well, it'd be really nice if that everything you did while you were in that web browser was destroyed when you logged out. And that could be a use case for something like this as well, where you would just set up a container that allows you to do whatever you want, but as soon as you log out of the system, you know, the container gets destroyed. So imagine a container that's still in a --rm. So all your content was cleaned up after you got out. So if you did something stupid like do online banking and have secrets stored by the web browser, then at least it would be destroyed. So, I mean, there are a decent amount of use cases for something like this, I believe.
Is there a project somewhere people can look at?
Not yet. We're not trying to make this a fully separate project from Podman. I think it's an enhancement to Podman, just another command that Podman can use. So my goal would be to write documentation in Podman how to do it and just have the command put on a system. So there'd be a Podman shell, which is Podman shell. It'll just be a symbolic link to Podman, and maybe it'll be a sub package, but I don't want to get into a whole separate project for this. Because again, it's just this is just something that Podman can do. You just have to create the quadlet.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
We sometimes call it container shell, but I've been calling it Podman shell more recently. So hopefully when we get together and do demos, we can demo it in a few weeks.
That'd be good. It's just a couple weeks away. All right. Given that and the time, I think I'm going to hand it off to Anders for the storage talk.
Yeah. So we had a previous meeting where I was asking a question, but we didn't have time for any answers. So I guess I will just ask it again. It was really about two separate features. One is called lazy pulling, where you divide a big layer into, I mean, without breaking compatibility, you can divide a container layer into sub files so that you can start a container without pulling all of it until it's needed. And related to that was the other question of peer-to-peer distribution of images without having to always pull it from the central registry. And I guess it would be a question for containers image, or, I mean, Podman would just use the storage. So there is some support about init in containerd. That's why I was asking if there's any like OCI work, or if it's anything that would come to Podman on those.
Yeah, Giuseppe's not here. I believe that this. Let me see if I can ping Giuseppe on this. He was around earlier, but I don't know if he's.
Yeah, I think he's on holiday today.
I believe we have some, we can handle this. What we don't have right now is you need a fused file system to make this thing work. Because the basic idea is you go out to run an image, and container storage would say the image exists, and then you go out, you read user bin foobar, and as soon as you execute user bin foobar, the underlying fused file system would reach out to the registry and say, okay, I need user bin foobar, and then user bin foobar would pull down, say it needs glibc, it would pull down glibc and continue on through the entire stack. I know that the person who wrote that originally, or someone who worked with it, opened up pull requests to get features like that into container storage. But I don't think anybody ever finalized it by putting in, somehow getting the underlying file system to do it. In my mind, it would be best to enhance fuse overlay to be able to handle it. But it's not something that anybody at Red Hat has worked on at this point. The reason we haven't really looked at it is because of the latency problem. But I think it is a reasonable issue. We've always preferred to try to avoid the latency, where you'd have an application up and running for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it would just go into a pause mode when it's downloading, gigabytes of data, and as opposed to downloading everything and then you don't have any latency.
Okay, yeah. So
I would say I'm all for it. I'm all for getting this into the upstream project. But rather than having, I'm not sure what the fuse file system that implements it, but if we could get that fuse file system merged somehow into fuse overlay, or get it to be a mode of fuse overlay, then we don't have two fuse file systems for supporting someone desperate.
Not exactly sure how it's implemented in the snapshot, or as it's called in containerd, but it has this. You need a special tar format in order to handle these.
Right.
I mean, division of the tar files. So
it's related.
And I think we had two different versions, right? We had one based on Z standard and that compression, and we had one based on the older work with the S tar. That I'm not sure if it was Google or something. So it seemed to be multiple implementations of the same idea, being able to hack one tar stream up into seekable portions while keeping compression.
I'm going through Google's container storage to figure out who opened up the pull request, but I'm looking for a star right now. But
no, I think we took. There was some talk about it like previous container plumbing, but not this one. So maybe, like you say, there are other concerns that are more important. So it's not the most desired feature.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just don't think that. I can't find who wrote it. Alan, do you remember anything about this?
I would have to go digging through it, same as you.
Yeah. But yeah,
it was.
As I said,
it was Akihiro talking about it. So.
It just hasn't come up as an interest for the developers at Red Hat at this point to support this thing. Just mainly because of the fuse file system problem, and we haven't focused on it.
Yeah, I ran into some similar issues while trying to promote peer-to-peer pulling of images, and that is you can easily set it to allow the private network only, but most peer-to-peer systems are public by default, which means people are verified. So when you mention peer-to-peer, it's like mentioning Docker Hub. you tell that to the private registry people, and they go into defensive mode, and then it's full lockdown and everything. So
Yeah.
but
Similar, we've been talking about that for about eight or 10 years now. So, nothing has happened in that front. And sadly,
so,
we don't have the people who work on Containers Image are here because they're on holiday.
yeah, well, I'm also supposed to be on holiday, so I can't really. Yeah,
So
that's fine.
we can put that. I mean, if you don't mind, we'll put that one on hold for.
Yeah, sure. We can
talk
come back
about
to
it. Let's talk about it next month when.
Yeah, I think IPFS is quite experimental anyway, so it could probably do with some more maturing. There were also some like halfway solutions where you would not hack up the layers, but you would distribute images from your peers. So you would talk to your peers and then see if anyone close to you has the image before pulling it from the registry. So there was some work like that.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think the issue they might have with that is how signing and could you verify the image and make sure it's the.
Yeah, I kind of assume some private.
The fear comes out. I asked for, the Fedora image, and someone says, "Oh, I got a Fedora image for you. Yeah, take this one." And how do you trust it?
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to postpone that one to the next meeting then. Get some more folks here. And thanks for bringing up Anders. And keep me honest, I put it on to the possible topics for the next one. I had thought the next one that we were going to do was with Maureen Duffy, and I thought she was going to be here. So I will just do a real quick talk about it based on what I've seen. Is Ashley here? Ashley, do you want to talk about this or give a quick demo?
Sorry. I don't have anything prepared, but I guess.
Just demonstrate the website.
Okay.
Nothing like putting you on the spot.
Let me see if I could share the tab for Podman IO.
And while she's doing that, I'll just say that it's gone to V1.0 officially as of this morning. We're getting it ready for the summit for Red Hat for next week, so it'll be announced there more officially. But you can have a sneak preview this week.
So we have a new website, Podman IO. It's been it's nice and shiny and it looks very, very good. But I guess it is brand new, so we haven't gone through. We're trying to go through and take a look at anything that is broken, and so we've been kind of taking a look at it. We have a bunch of links and other things. I don't know what else to say about it other than it looks really nice. But I think there's still a little bit of work that we're doing. But if you have some time, feel free to click through it and see what works, what you guys like and what you don't like. And we'll see what we can do about it, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and add a little bit more. Just basically, it's on GitHub Containers, podman.io, as the old site was. If you had happened to clone that site prior to podman.io, it's now pointing to podman.io_old. So if you try and make an update there, it's going to go to the old site and not to the new site. So you'll need to reclone if you've cloned prior podman.io. And please, just standard issues. If you have, just use the standard issue process on GitHub. If you find anything, go add them there. And Maureen's been very responsive there for the ones that we found. And do know that we have got a couple more online in there right now that we need to chase down. I'm hoping to clear those up over the next few days. But happy to get any kind of feedback there. And even if it's, yeah, this doesn't work so well, or hey, this looks great. So please have at it.
Click on Get Started, actually. I think, where's the one that tells about how to download? Because it's going to show. Is that this one?
So we don't, it's just on the front page. We have a little download drop down. I actually was working on, hold on, let me see. Let's see.
Because one of the things we have done is sort of there's Podman Desktop and then Podman
Mhm.
Main, and this website is somewhat of a combination of the two.
Yep.
Because I think general users are just going to look, how do I get Podman on my Mac, or how do I get Podman on my Windows box? And for something like Podman, I think the Linux community is a little more savvy about how you're probably going to get a package onto your distribution. So we wanted to make, obvious place that you go to is podman.io and make it easy for you to find.
Actually worked on this morning, which is now there's a CLI option. So you can download desktop and you can also get the CLI. And so it's kind of a combination. If it tries to point you into the desktop direction if you want the desktop stuff, and then it also gives you an option of looking for CLI stuff. Yeah.
And so if you were on a Mac, you would see one that says download it for a Mac, I would hope.
Yep. So it automatically detects what OS you're on, which is pretty cool.
And do you want to promote the Podman engine name instead of Podman CLI, which could also relate to Podman Remote?
Sure. I think it might be confusing for people who don't know the difference between Podman Engine and Podman Desktop. I think CLI kind of makes it obvious that this is a CLI tool.
But what? So the primary option is downloading Podman Desktop.
Mhm.
And then Podman CLI, would that be the Podman Remote for that desktop, or would it be the one that includes the actual running of containers, like
I
the
think
full Podman?
It's just Podman itself.
Yeah.
I guess for Linux it is the engine, but for Mac and Windows it would just be a CLI. So I guess technically it is. I think we can change this saying install Podman engine using a package manager or something like that. But if that makes it more clear.
I was just wondering if the now Podman Desktop has gotten all the advertisements, if you want to call it that, or highlights. So something similar happened to Docker. So I mean, it's only natural. But they have some kind of product entry for. So you have a product entry for the Docker Desktop, and you have a product entry for the Docker engine, which dumps you straight into the Linux distributions and how to install on your server type of thing. And something similar could be done for Podman if you want to separate the worlds while having the Podman Desktop focus here. And then you could have a separate section for how you install Podman on your Linux machine, and how you run Podman, not remotely, but how you run it locally. I mean, the old site, if you want to call it that.
Yep.
How you?
I think we could put more documentation on this stuff and clarify it. Yeah.
It's funny. I'm not crazy about the name engine because I don't think that's a normal user term. So
no, the whole
CLI is. I would prefer to say Podman for Linux, but we're starting to bug shed at this point. So yeah, at least the icon makes it a little bit clearer. But yeah.
No, those are definitely someone else's words and terms. So they are just there to make the transition easier for people. If you would start out from scratch, we would not call it that.
Yeah, I use engine all the time, but I'm not sure that.
I think that even the programs is engine.
Yeah.
I mean, if you run Podman version, it will tell you it's engine. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Great. Yeah, it does look good. Actually, thank you for doing well with that, given how much time you had to prepare.
Yeah.
And if anybody from community wants to contribute, we'd love to have contributions. You don't have to be a engineer to contribute to that website.
Right. And then the last one we had was with Dan, topics for the App Store.
So this is actually just an idea. We haven't done much work on it yet, but people have been asking us for examples of how to use different tools. And Docker has this thing called Awesome Compose. And a lot of people go to Awesome Compose to get Docker Compose examples that they can sort of take and then hack on. So a few people have been pinging us about could we have some kind of site like that? And I think the obvious thing for us to work on would be to first create a site and then allow people to start to contribute, say, either Kubernetes YAML files or Quadlets that people might want to experiment with. So the idea was to set up GitHub containers /App Store, and then set up 2 subdirectories underneath it where people could start opening up pull requests to get their favorite, variant on, how they want to run their WordPress inside of a Quadlet, or how they would run, a MariaDB database inside of Kubernetes. Now, what we'd want to have, if we start to build out this, we probably need to have some kind of CI/CD system where we would continuously test all the Quadlets and YAML files that are available against newer versions of Podman to make sure that they continue working. And then if stuff becomes stale and old, then we have to get rid of it. I think the fear with something like this is when stuff gets old and crusty. And I also worry about if people are putting versions of images into their examples, people start to pull down images that are 2 or 3 years out of date. And how do we do? So I think we've talked about this internally. Chris has pointed out that I think Renovate can actually help us out a little bit with that secondary problem, and that it could go through and actually update versions of images or open a pull request to update version of images. So just opening up to have anybody have any ideas or thoughts on this.
I do. I spoke to someone that Mark Russell had been speaking with. I think they actually know each other from Canonical. And the gentleman's name is George. I think it's George Castro. And George has been proposing to Mark that this exact concept minus Quadlet needed to get done, and was looking for a home to put all this. He evidently has oodles of this stuff already done. And I spoke with him for about an hour and 15 minutes. Basically, he wants to do what we're needing, and wants a spot to put it that's somewhat associated with containers. He was going to reach out to Tom to actually get on the schedule for today, but he must not have been able to in the short order. But I think the next thing to do is just have him come talk about what his idea is and what he's got already. And he's looking from us just like simple.
Yeah.
There's some stuff he hasn't figured out, like, container wise, and there's some stuff that, could go this way, could go that way, and he's just looking for tie break and advice.
And we can get ChatGPT to just start generating these things for us.
Well, I think the problem that this team has is we are container tools development. And that's fundamentally different than container service or container creation. And I mean, we probably all have our little pet projects, but I'm guessing none of us are MySQL experts, or, we can get Nginx running, but just enough to serve a file.
Right. Yeah.
So
I can get an Apache web server up and curl to it, and that's about it. Yeah, basically none of us are real good sysadmins. At least that's not our core function.
Right. So again, got my vote. I'd like to a little bit deeper dive with George and, spin him off and get going.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he has time to this.
It'd be nice if someone went through all of awesome Compose and wrote equivalent applications in Kubernetes YAML files, and that could run with Podman. I'm trying to make sure that they don't become a general Kubernetes YAML drop site, because there might be lots and lots of stuff that Podman can't handle. That's why I like the idea of verifying that the applications would actually run with Podman.
Indeed. And I know a fair amount of those apps, if you will, that are in Awesome, and some of them don't do anything.
Right.
That just like hello world type stuff. So I think ideally what you're looking for is put your gunk in this volume and then make sure it gets mounted.
Right.
I'm guessing that probably writing tests for these things is going to be equal to, if not harder than developing them in the first place.
Yeah.
Especially the quadlet stuff. I mean, if it's simple things like curling from a URL or using a MySQL client to connect to a MySQL container, that kind of stuff can probably do, but anything more complex can get challenging.
Or just start a service and then have Podman inspected to make sure that the stuff that you thought was going to be created got created, type of thing.
Yeah.
But again, what I'm hoping is that if we start getting these things, then images start disappearing, that we can easily clean out applications that sort of disappear from the face of the planet, right? People's priorities change, and they're not going to necessarily maintain their own applications that get donated to the site.
There's also this question of, do you tag it? Like, let's say you were going to do, MySQL or something. Do you, I think there's a fair amount of variety that could occur, whether you depend on building the image, MySQL image. Do you start at like the Ubuntu level and then all the way up, or do you grab Ubuntu's MySQL, and then how does the versioning work? Because if you go latest, then you're subject to failures in which something inside the image changes, which puts Ed into orbit. Or you say tag it to a particular version, and now you have to go update that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something we have to worry about with the CI/CD system. Again, we're all channeling Ed here because Ed knows there's nothing more unstable than container registries as far as CI/CD systems. So, if 75% of the time our test suite blows up because it couldn't pull down some random image, then we're never going to get a successful test through.
The other little treat here would be that also, if I was a consumer of that stuff, I don't think I'd want something pointing to latest either. But I would like to be notified when, a new image comes up. In case
Renovate
security.
Renovate can handle that pretty elegantly. You can set up regular expressions that can extract version numbers, and then basically give it a source of where those versions come from, and it'll open up PRs when it finds a new one. There's also a way you can do kind of a more generic thing that's probably more user-friendly, where you set up a regular expression that searches for a comment, a special comment that says, get the versions from this source, use this type of versioning, and other options like that. And then that's probably easier. But then it's just adding the stuff is just, somebody putting a comment into their code, and Renovate will pick it up automatically.
So it seems like, I think I've already created the website, containers, app store. Let me just make sure it's nice and blank right now. It has a license and a one-line text. And I did that a week ago and then forgot about it.
Can you add a link to the chat?
I will. My goal was to create 2 subdirectories underneath it, one called Kubernetes and one called Podlet. And GitHub will not let you create empty directories and then check them in. You have to put content in the directories. I didn't have any content, and then some other sparkly light went off and I went chasing after whatever that was. So
Yeah. Could you just drop a README as each? Just a real quick README.
could I drop one?
Put a .mp file in there.
Yeah, in the directories you want to create, just put a little README at the top.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would have been nice. But now that I have this site up, you can open up a pull request to do that. Want to be Tom Sawyer? I want you to paint my wall, whitewash my fence. I guess we can open up to general discussion at this point.
Yes, any questions, topics that anybody has?
I've got one. So I've been curious that the pass-through log driver, it's not really clear to me when I should or would want to use that as opposed to Journal D, or if Podman selects a default based on where it's running. At the moment, I specified Journal D explicitly, and I'm wondering if, as I went down this rabbit hole where Conmon takes standard, by default, well, it takes standard error and marks it red in the logs, and Python logs write everything to standard error. So everything that Python writes shows up in red. So I went down this rabbit hole of figuring that out. And then I changed syslog and I figured out the issue, but I was like, maybe I should be using pass-through instead of Journal D. So does anybody have any direction or guidelines on how to decide one or the other?
I think the goal of pass-through is that if you're running it underneath as a system D service, and pass-through will allow you, when you do a Podman system D status, you'll be able to see it right in the via system D, right? And then if you run journal, you'd have to use a Podman command or a journal. You wouldn't see it as part of the output to the unit file. I believe is what the difference is.
Well, I believe you do. I mean, because I'm doing Journal D now, and that everything, journal control -f shows everything. It all gets tagged with the proper.
But are you doing it on the unit file, or are you doing it at the container level?
Well, both. I run it in like when I run it standalone, I use log driver, and then when you do make system D, it captures that. So my
Does
container,
it switch to pass through at that point?
No, I mean not.
It's the journal.
So across the board, I explicitly specify log driver Journal D. Does Podman do something under the covers like, oh, hey, I'm a system D service, so let's use pass through? I can't say.
No. It does. I don't believe it does. The original version of Quadlet was attempting to do that, I believe, and I think that's all been revoked. But
because I don't know what Journal D or what system D does with outputs. I mean, I haven't dove into it enough to know, like, are they somewhat equivalent? Like if you're using a journal D driver, it's still sticking in the journal, and if you do it through System D, it just attaches standard out to the journal. Like I haven't really dug into that, so it may be equivalent when it's running under System D. It may be a one or the other.
But that would not make sense if they had a pass through. Because I thought pass through just meant write to standard out, standard error while inside a unifile. But I might be mistaken. Matt,
That is definitely the intention. Pass through is basically it will have conmon log directly to standard out, standard error, and since System D is monitoring conmon, it will print it directly to the journal. The intention, Giuseppe is the one who added it. So I don't want to speak for him necessarily because I'm not 100% on why it's there, but I believe the intention was better integration into, better integration with Podman inside a System D unit in certain circumstances, but I'm not completely aware of what those circumstances are. This also happened at a much earlier time in the life of the journal log driver. At that point, we were not well integrated with basically the journal log driver was not logging to the same, you get logs, but they wouldn't show up as associated with the unit in question. I think that has been fixed since, so it might be that some of the reasons we're using it have gone away. I will say it's certainly simpler than the journal D log driver, but probably a lot more performance.
Yeah. I think that one of the problems with pass-through is that if you do a Podman logs, then you don't see it anymore, right?
Yeah, pass-through completely disables Podman logs because we don't have any ability to get what logs are associated with Podman. It's similar to just not logging at all in that way. So it's basically you're giving up Podman's ability to view the logs in exchange for theoretically better integration with journal CTO.
All right. Well, maybe I'll play around.
The most likely, Lance, what I would say is if you like it with journal D, I would stick with journal D and not use pass through, because when that, my only thing is if I do a status of the unifile or a journal control -u of the unifile, do I see the data that's coming out of the container?
Right. Because now I'm trying to
If I
think.
do, then I would, if that works with journal, then that's probably all you really care about. So I would just stick, because
I guess there's some interaction with conmon there.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who exactly is tagging entries with all the variables that Podman attaches.
Yeah. Basically, when you run Podman inside of System D unifile and Podman goes away, what System D is watching is conmon. And if conmon outputs any standard out or standard error, that's sort of what a traditional service would do inside of a System D unifile. If conmon is writing directly to the journal, then I'm not sure if you see that you see the same behavior as if it was writing to standard out and standard error. That would be my question.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I said, at the moment I kind of got, once I fixed the Python syslog thing, it's working the way I like it to. So
yeah.
All right. Good.
We're all about flexibility here.
Yeah, I'll just play with it. And it probably is, like I said, journal D's been around a while, so probably some of it's been alleviated in the last couple of years. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions? We're getting close to the end of the meeting. I'm not hearing anything, so I'm just going to give a quick reminder for our next meetings. Our next community meeting is on Tuesday, June 6th. So that's just around the corner, a couple of weeks from now, right after the holiday in the US. And then our Cabal meeting will be on June 15th. And both of those meetings will be at 11 o'clock. June 15th is a Thursday, and the community meeting is a Tuesday. And so for possible topics, we already have two lined up. One is the IPFS integration that Anders was talking about earlier, and then also some more talks about the App Store. If anybody has any other topics, please let me know, either through the HackMD script or HackMD site, or by sending me an email. So any other questions or comments before I turn off the recording here? Right. Well, then I'll thank you for coming today, and I'll turn off the recording.